Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Monday, July 15th, and we have a packed show for you today. We're going to be starting off with the news that broke over the weekend that Jalen Brunson, the, of course, very popular point guard of the New York Knicks, is only rising in popularity within New York as he signed a new contract extension with the Knicks and ended up taking a $113 million pay cut to remain with the team, keep them under the second luxury tax apron, and be able to give the Knicks more flexibility when it comes to their roster moves and try and help them compete for an NBA Finals. So we're going to be diving into that, how it impacts him and the money that he's going to be able to make moving forward, how it impacts the Knicks with their flexibility, and additionally, what ripple effect it could have across the NBA. So we're going to be talking about that. Additionally, we are going to be starting to amp up the football content as we get closer and closer to the beginning of the 2024-25 NFL season. So I'm going to start off with my first season preview, and we're going to be doing the Buffalo Bills starting in the AFC East and moving onwards from there. So we will be breaking down the Bills' upcoming season, talking about some breakout candidates as well, both within Buffalo and across the league. And then finally, we're going to be wrapping up the show with a little bit of MLB coverage, talking about the All-Star break and previewing those events, where we stand betting-wise with some of those lines, and finally talking about my Boston Red Sox and where they stand in the American League after their series win over the Kansas City Royals. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can leave a tip or donation at the link gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment, it will pop up on screen for everybody to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. It was definitely a surprise seeing the headline break about Jalen Brunson's new contract. Brunson coming off of a year where he was top 5 in MVP voting, and especially coming off of an offseason where we've talked about it at length a couple times here on our show about the massive contracts that have been getting handed out to members of that 2021 draft class who haven't necessarily fully proven themselves yet. And yet we see a contract from Jalen Brunson where he signs a 4-year, $156.5 million deal, which is good for about $39 million in annual average value, which is obviously still a lot of money, but is way cheaper than what his actual value is in the league at this point. He was eligible for a max extension, but he ended up taking $113 million less than he could have gotten if he waited until next offseason for the sake of trying to help out the Knicks organization build a championship contender. Now, he does have a chance to make this money back, so before it sort of sounds like, we get set in stone that Brunson took all this less money, and he did, absolutely, but this contract begins in the 2025-26 season. It's guaranteed through 2027-28, where he then has a player option, and at that point in 2028, he can opt out and be eligible for a $323 million max, or he can wait another year and make $418 million over the course of 5 years if he signs that deal in 2029. And just for you math experts out there, $418 million over the course of 5 years amounts to almost $84 million in terms of annual value. So Jalen Brunson very easily has another payday coming down the line. Now, that being said, there is still a good amount of risk that is involved in this because this is assuming everything goes right in these next few years through these contracts. Again, that $418 million deal sounds like an incredible get for Jalen Brunson, but he is about to turn 28 years old, and I believe he's going to be 31 by the time he can enter free agency for the first time, assuming he does end up declining that player option for 2028-29. But there is no guarantee at that point, 31 years old, or if he were to try and wait for the $418 million deal, he'd be 32 years old at that point. And at that point, we'll see, assuming that the front office is stable, which it finally does feel like that is the case in New York, then maybe they will just be willing to sacrifice that amount of money almost in debt to Jalen Brunson, because he is already solidifying himself as a Knicks all-timer, and he has been able to really rejuvenate this franchise that was struggling for the past decade, and he has been an absolute hit with them. But maybe it's personally, as the Celtics fan watching the rise and fall of Isaiah Thomas, I do worry a little bit about small guards and how they tend to age. Now, we'll see with Jalen Brunson. At least last year, he was asked to run a lot of that offense, and that was because of all the other injuries that came into play throughout the course of the season, but a very high usage rate. He's now entering his prime. There's a very good chance he is technically out of that peak by the time that he is a qualified free agent at that point. And it will be a conversation as to whether or not the organization decides to hand out that much money. Now, again, that's an issue that Knicks fans, you don't have to worry about for a number of years here. But it is something to at least highlight there, that there is a chance that Jalen Brunson did cost himself a lot of money here. So I know I just sort of gave both sides of it. Again, we won't know for some time, but as for what we do know, this does keep the Knicks under the second luxury tax apron, which has been the number one most talked about thing, it feels like, during the offseason, about trying to limit getting into that apron and all the restrictions that come with it. So Brunson is able to help the Knicks out in that facet for this offseason alone, at least. We just saw LeBron James take a $2.6 million pay cut to also get his team and the Lakers under that apron. But with Brunson, this is an unprecedented pay cut, really, where there have been other stars throughout the course of recent NBA history that have taken less money, but nothing quite as substantial as what Brunson is giving up in this deal, where we saw in the early 2010s with the Miami Heat, the Heatles of LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, they all took a little bit less money to make that work. Tim Duncan in 2007 took an $11 million pay cut to help the Spurs keep Ginobili and Tony Parker. And then in 2017, Kevin Durant took $10 million less for Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston. So again, we've seen examples in the past, but nothing to the extent of what Brunson is doing right now. And he's doing so to try and maximize the opportunity that is currently in front of the New York Knicks, where last year they feel very confident that if they were fully healthy, they would have been in the Eastern Conference Finals and would have had a really good chance against the Boston Celtics, who of course went on to go and win the finals. Now, I still think that I would have picked the Celtics over the Knicks. I thought that the Knicks were almost a little bit of a, call it a year and a half project. The Knicks were great last year when they made the trade for OG Anunoby at the deadline. I love the move that it was going to be really impactful for them. I don't think it puts them over the edge. This is at least what I was saying at the time, is that I didn't think it put them over the edge immediately, but it was a phenomenal, call it a third option to add to the roster with a ton of value that goes beyond the stat sheet. And that is the case. The Knicks go when they add another star in Mikal Bridges. So they are now kind of full go for being a true finals contender in the NBA now. And, it's going to be a very interesting experiment to watch. Also, because, of course, the Villanova factor that plays into this. And you look at Brunson, he really is living his best life right now, where he is in his prime. He's playing with his best friends from college, trying to, pull off I wouldn't call it the impossible, but the overall likelihood of all of those players getting together at Villanova and these years later having the same level of success in the NBA would be an all-time story in my eyes. And Brunson, he is playing with his best friends for one of the most popular franchises in not just the NBA, but, American sports altogether. He is still going to be making $34 plus million in these, next 3 or 4 seasons. And he is going to be making a ton of money as well off of endorsements, where I almost feel like it makes him that much more likable in especially New York. But, it's a commendable thing. Now, I'm sure that to some degree the NBA Players Association doesn't see it quite as commendable, considering the fact that this could have an impact on the overall market of the NBA. Again, like I just mentioned, the second luxury tax apron is a very hot topic in the league, and it is going to be really interesting to see, considering that this is a pretty new phenomenon in the NBA, about whether or not this type of a move could set any sort of a precedent or almost reset the market in the opposite way. We always talk about resetting the market with the newest contracts that are signed, and typically it is on the expensive end of, this player, when you're this good, is worth X amount of dollars. You look at a little bit of an NFL comp here, but Jared Goff getting a $50 million deal, that's a new bar that a lot of these other up-and-coming quarterbacks are going to see that money and request that much in particular. But again, this is a little bit of an opposite situation with Brunson in the Knicks, where he took the pay cut, and now maybe there's going to be some amount of pressure on other players to be seen as team first guys and take pay cuts. The idea that this could become some sort of a standard, or that franchises could try and hold the Brunson contract over their own players to get them to take less money. Ultimately, I don't think this will ever become the standard. You're asking a lot out of people, not just NBA players, not just athletes, but people, to take significantly less money, millions of dollars, in this case hundreds of millions of dollars less, for the idea of public perception as to whether or not you're a team first guy. So I think it's going to take a lot for it to ultimately have an impact on the overall market, but it's at least something that I think is worth mentioning. And like I said before, we've seen so many of these teams already just be quick to hand out these massive contract extensions. And, the Knicks really benefited from having a player here who was willing to go a little bit in the other direction. And I think the Knicks are going to have a golden opportunity moving forward here, where in terms of contenders, they're going to be one of the few teams that feels like they have a really good chance of winning the finals that are under that second luxury tax apron next season. So that is definitely an advantage for them. And I do ultimately think that it is commendable for Jalen Brunson. Now, like I just talked about, I don't think it's fair to have this be the standard and that it's some sort of knock on a person's character if they aren't willing to take this type of a pay cut. I think maybe the circumstances are kind of particular here that they work out for Jalen Brunson. Great, I have seen a couple things about the speculation as to whether or not Rick Brunson, his father, that is on the Knicks coaching staff, if he's going to end up seeing a raise in sometime soon. But ultimately, all of that aside, it's a really cool story for Knicks fans. You have to feel excited about that. sure if you are a fan of other teams, you can feel a little bit slighted, but at the same time, Jalen Brunson has just been, all-time lore in Knicks history, and he's going to go down on the Mount Rushmore, be one of the greats. Just has to have a little bit more of that postseason success, and we'll see if that is achievable with this new core. But we are going to be taking our first break here, and when we come back on the other side, like I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to start to dive into some more NFL content as we get closer to the season. I have the schedule in front of me for the Buffalo Bills for next season, and we're going to be running through the overall view of that roster and talk about where I expect them to end up next year. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be providing a season preview for the Buffalo Bills in the upcoming NFL season. This is something that we are going to be diving more and more into as the off season comes to a close and we start to get there, trying to run through all 32 teams. And first off, we are going to be going with the AFC East and the Buffalo Bills. So for the Bills, I think that the biggest question for them headed into this season is how are they going to look offensively without Stefon Diggs? That was obviously the number one storyline that surrounded them this offseason, but even if you go back to early training camp last year, this has been a conversation as to what the future looks like for Diggs on the Bills moving forward, and clearly it was coming to an end. Diggs had a number of really impressive seasons with Buffalo, and I do believe that he made Josh Allen a significantly better quarterback because Allen was raw in a lot of different ways during his first couple seasons, and Diggs was the solidified number one wide receiver that was able to help him tap into his immense skills. Now, what does the offense look like without Diggs? They don't have a number one receiver or somebody who is at least going to garner the attention that Diggs did for the majority of his time in Buffalo. But surprisingly, there are a decent list of names there when you look at wide receiver. Khalil Shakir, who was a standout guy for them down the stretch of the season last year. Keon Coleman was their draft selection at the end of the first round this year. And then you have a number of veterans: Curtis Samuel, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Chase Claypool, a couple other interesting pieces such as Mac Hollins and Andy Isabella. Now, I know if you are sitting there and saying, well, none of those names are all that good, I agree. It's at least, kind of a surprising collection of options for them at least. Now, again, it's still going to be a group that has to establish themselves and prove themselves that they can be good enough for Josh Allen, but Now, along with them, too, you have a really good tight end room, in my opinion, between Dalton Kincaid, their first round selection last year, and Dawson Knox, who is one of the more underrated tight ends in the league. But James Cook in the backfield as well, who last year was 6th in the league in scrimmage yards. So I'd say that they have a pretty solid offense overall. Offensive line is fine. Maybe they're slightly below average. There are some really bad pass protection stats with them on 3rd and longs. They allowed pressure in 2.5 seconds or less 45.9% of the time, which was the most in the league. So, a couple notable names in Deion Dawkins, who they just got on a contract extension, and Connor McGovern as well at left tackle and center, respectively. Maybe we could see guard Osiris Torrance take a step forward in his second season. He was a second-round pick in last year's draft. But overall, when you're talking about the offense, really you are asking the question, is Josh Allen good enough? Do you trust him without a true number one wide receiver? And I would argue yes. Now, eye test for me last year, I thought that Allen played better down the second half of the season when Diggs was less involved. But as you can see for our video viewers on screen, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. So Stefon Diggs had his last 100-yard game as a Buffalo Bill in week 6. And when you look at the season splits for Josh Allen from when Diggs was consistently producing for them in weeks 1 through 6 versus the latter half of the season, Josh Allen's numbers dissipated a good amount. Weeks 1 through 6, 262.2 yards per game, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 71.7 completion percentage, and a 102.8 passer rating. And then in weeks 7 through 17, it was 248 yards per game, 16 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, a 63.6 completion percentage, and an 86.4 quarterback rating. And across the board, those numbers are obviously down. You look as well, 13 touchdowns and through weeks 1 through 6 versus just 16 in weeks 7 through 17. The touchdowns per game average went down there as well, 2.2 per game in 1 through 6, and then 1.5 per game afterwards. But despite the stats, I do think he's capable of being a quarterback that puts together methodical drives. And that was one of my bigger knocks with not just Josh Allen, but the Bills in their entirety for couple years now. You look back to the divisional round in the 2022 season versus the Cincinnati Bengals, where Allen had 264 yards, but the Bills scored just 10 points against the Bengals and only had 19 first downs. It was a lot of hit or miss plays. The Bills weren't at a point where they could consistently put together a string of good plays. It sort of was a home run or bust. This past year, when the Bills lost in the playoffs to the Chiefs, Allen only had 186 pass yards, but the offense looked far better in my opinion. And it obviously helps that the Bills had a real run game this time around. When they played the Bengals in 2022, Allen was their leading rusher in that playoff game with 26 yards. Devin Singletary, their lead back at the time, had just 6 carries for 25 yards. But in this Chiefs game, they didn't turn the ball over. They actually outgained the Chiefs in both yards, and they had more first downs than the Chiefs as well. And across the board, like I said, a lot of these stats would tell you that the Bills played better than the Chiefs offensively. But Josh Allen was not really able to put it all together on that game-winning drive, or what could have been the game-winning drive. He drove them the length of the field. They started on their own 20, put them on the Kansas City 26-yard line with a chance to tie it with under 2 minutes left in that game to send it to overtime. But Tyler Bass, of course, does end up missing that field goal, and, the game ends there because of that. But Allen did miss a couple throws at the end of the game that cost them extra yardage, potentially even a touchdown. And it was kind of the second time, too, because we saw that a little bit earlier in the season as well during that primetime game where they played the Eagles and they came up short in overtime. So Josh Allen does have some proving to do still, but I absolutely believe in the talent, and I think that he is more than capable of continuing to be great post Stefon Diggs. Defense is obviously the other part of the equation for the Bills. You look at their statistics across the board; they were an above an above league average, you could say, defense for the majority of the year, and even better than that in certain instances. They were ninth in total defense, seventh in pass defense, fourth in scoring defense, a little bit more middle of the pack in rush defense at 15th. And you look at, they were, again, in that top 50% of the NFL in every category other than red zone or third downs, where they were on the bottom. And that's obviously areas that they are going to need to improve. Now, they also lost a number of big names on their defense: Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, but they do still have a lot of talent there as well. They still have Matt Milano, who's probably a top 5 linebacker in the league, who missed most of last year with a fractured tibia. They have one of the best cornerback duos in the NFL between Taron Johnson and Rasul Douglas. Johnson selected to the All-Pro second team last year. Very underrated player there. And Douglas, a nice pickup from the Packers at the trade deadline last season, where he has ranked 10th in pass in coverage grades according to Pro Football Focus over the course of the past 2 seasons. So a number of other younger names as well that I like: AJ Epinesa, Christian Benford being a couple of them. But that being said, there is a lot of unproven with this Bills defense that does have some cause for concern when you lose out on a couple of your veterans and your leaders. But looking at their schedule as a whole here, they have 5 primetime games, including 3 straight from weeks I believe it is 2 through 4, where they are playing against the Dolphins on Thursday Night Football, the Jaguars on Monday Night Football, and then the Ravens on Sunday Night Football, all consecutively. Some key games for them outside of their own division: like I mentioned, just week 4 against the Ravens, week 5 against the Texans, week 11 against the Chiefs, week 13 against the 49ers, and week 15 against the Rams. When you look at the overall situation for them here, they have the 10th hardest schedule according to it is Sharp Football Analysis, which as we move forward here as a whole with these types of previews, I like the way that they do it the best because they base it off of expected wins for this upcoming season, as opposed to a lot of strength of schedule projections, which go based off of a team's win percentage the year prior. So again, Bills at the 10th hardest schedule as things currently stand. And that being said, I have a lot of faith in the infrastructure that they have. This is going to be, I would argue, a pretty key season for Sean McDermott, where he's had a lot of success early on with the Buffalo Bills, even going back to the season that they took them to the playoffs with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. But they are going to probably be looking towards him, where this has been a very successful team. You have Josh Allen, who is just about a consensus top 3 quarterback in the NFL, and they haven't made it out of the AFC just yet. Now, I think it's far more difficult than people make it out to be, and what is a coaching change necessarily going to do because of that. But more and more eyes are going to be on Sean McDermott as the years go on here. So I am looking at that. But Josh Allen, I trust him, and I think that there is still a lot of talent on this roster, that you have some of these older, experienced names like White and Poyer and Hyde that leave, and Diggs, of course, to that same point as well. But they had to do a lot of reconstruction considering their financial situation, and I feel like they've made it out pretty well. So the over-under line for them is 10.5. I ran through, game by game and just sort of tallied wins and losses, and I came out to 11 wins. So I think that line is probably very accurate at 10.5. It's going to come close to that. And I'm going to lean over for it because, again, I just trust Josh Allen. I think that I understand the concerns with his turnovers at times as well, but I think that you can get a lot worse than somebody who has the payoff that Josh Allen does and takes risks at times almost because it's necessary in some circumstances. And the arm talent is just elite enough that I think you can, and again, through the ground too, which I haven't even mentioned his running game. I thought he did a really good job of scrambling, other than the fact that he did fumble, but going back to that Chiefs playoff game. But, I think the Bills are going to, they were kind of the buzz team this offseason that people were hopping off of the bandwagon because they did have a very tough financial situation, but I thought they did a really good job of maneuvering that situation. And again, I'm going around 11 wins, but let me know what your predictions are for the Bills next season in the comments section. But we are going to continue doing these from here on out, one a day moving forward. So we'll be sticking with the AFC East tomorrow, probably talking about, Dolphins, Jets, whichever one pops up next on ESPN.com. But we're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into the overall NFL season. We do have some content with the Buffalo Bills as well, but I have a list of potential breakout players in the NFL next season. Some of these younger guys who could take a big step into national prominence. So we are going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as I'm going to be giving my list here of NFL players that are due for breakout seasons in the upcoming year. And we're going to be just bouncing around the league here, starting with some position players. And first name I have here is Michael Wilson, wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. He was the Cardinals' third leading receiver last season with 568 yards behind Trey McBride and Hollywood Brown. He did so on just 38 receptions, which was good for 14.9 yards per catch. That ranks just outside the top 20 in the league at 22. And Hollywood Brown is now out in Arizona. That being said, he is going to be replaced with almost a more reliable wide receiver one in Marvin Harrison Jr., at least in my opinion. And, Hollywood, you look at, obviously, he's a big name, former first-round selection, but wasn't all that convincing of a number one. he had just 51 catches on 101 targets, so 50 incompletions looking to him. And I think that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a better pro on day one than Brown was for the Cardinals last season. And another thing that is sort of going in, I think that's an advantage for Wilson, who may be better suited as a number two. Wilson was a day two pick in last year's draft, and never really was seen as somebody who can put a franchise on his back from a receiver standpoint, but I think he is an incredible supplementary talent, and I'm looking forward to seeing how him and Marvin Harrison Jr. are able to mesh. And not just that, but also with Kyler Murray actually playing the full year this time around, I am looking to see whether or not he can develop a rapport with him. And, I think that Wilson probably, it looked a little bit uncomfortable with him and Kyler when that experiment first started up last year, but now with a full training camp and a full season ahead of them, knock on wood, from the perspective of Kyler Murray, that we're going to see Wilson's numbers go up this year, and think that he can be a real contributor as this Cardinals team is sort of looking to retool and see what they actually have offensively with both Murray and the other additional skill position players on their roster. Got a couple other skill position players here. Dalton Kincaid, tight end out of Buffalo. He is, like I just mentioned, one half of a potential incredible two-man tight end duo. And when you look at Kincaid, I thought he was pretty underutilized for a lot of last season. Now, ultimately, he was able to, have 91 targets on the season as a whole, caught 73 passes, 673 yards. I kind of anticipated him being a little bit more of a red zone threat. You look at his size, he's 6'4", 240, so he's got a good amount of bulk on him, and I do think that he can develop into that more, but I also fully believe that he can play in space. I think that him and Dawson Knox are both very athletic tight ends that they're going to be able to run a variety of different looks with, so Kincaid is somebody that I was really high on when he came out of Utah last year in the draft. Bills ended up taking him in the first round, and I am definitely high on him. And I'm also high on another tight end that was taken just 10 picks after Kincaid in last year's draft, in Michael Mayer, tight end out of he was at Notre Dame. Now he just played his rookie season with the Las Vegas Raiders. And all of the eyes right now are, of course, on Brock Bowers, who the Raiders took in the first round of this past year's draft. But Bowers is somebody I feel like the Raiders are going to be able to line up anywhere. And I think that it's another situation where, even with the multiple bodies at the position, I still feel like Mayer is going to be able to have success. So we'll see. I'm sort of betting on the pedigree here with Mayer because he's been incredible for a number of years, like going back to Notre Dame. And my biggest concern in terms of why Mayer wouldn't be able to have a breakout year this season is because there are questions at the quarterback position. We don't know who the starter is going to be just yet between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. That's going to be a battle during training camp. I feel like it's probably going to end up being Gardner Minshew, but we'll see there. But Mayer is somebody who has plenty of talent. And again, maybe I'm jumping the gun. Maybe it's a year from now when he has a better quarterback option. And there is also a chance that Bowers sort of just, eats up all of Mayer's real looks. But I think that they can coexist and they can both thrive on that note as well. Now, some defensive players here. I have Kyler Gordon of the Chicago Bears. There are a lot of really promising defenders on the Bears defense, and that's something that I did not expect to be saying when I was looking at the Bears a year ago today. But they have built up, a number of different young pieces that can be real impact players. I would say that Jaquan Brisker has already broken out. You have others, Tyreek Stevenson, who just got a new deal this offseason. He's a big-time player for them. Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon kind of got lost in the mix, I feel like, this past season. And part of that was because he was dealing with a hand fracture after week 1 that kept him out. I believe it was until week 6, but once he came back, we saw his coverage numbers improved upon. He was playing a little bit of a different role this time around, where he was being used a lot more as a nickel cornerback. Like I mentioned, there were some actual more bodies in that secondary that the Bears were able to trust, and we'll see how Gordon is used this upcoming year. But, I decided to choose him as the highlight player of someone who can look to break out, but I do feel like there are a number of names on that Chicago defense that we could be looking at, and I do trust Matt Eberflus, I think, in terms of being a defensive mind. Now, offense is obviously where the Bears are going to have to be looking because of the investment into quarterbacks in recent years, but I think the Bears are in a very good position moving forward here. I also have Christian Gonzalez, another young cornerback playing for the New England Patriots, and he was on his way towards being, I think, Pro Bowl conversation. He was incredible at the beginning of the season, at least for what he was asked to do as well, when he ended up getting hurt in week 4 against the Cowboys. But through the Patriots' first 3 games last year, they played the Eagles, the Dolphins, and the Jets. And, Gonzalez spent the majority of his introduction to the NFL guarding A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and Garrett Wilson. And I thought he really held his own, especially how he was the number 1 option to slow down Tyreek Hill. And the job that he did in week 2, I think it was on Sunday Night Football, I thought he did a phenomenal job, and I'm expecting him to return to form. I thought that he was the best cornerback coming out in the 2023 draft at the time, and what I saw from him on the field, granted in limited playing time, was a positive that I believe is going to be able to sustain in the coming years. Tuli Tuipulotu as well, out of the Los Angeles Chargers, an edge rusher that really came onto my radar when I was watching a Patriots game, actually, and it was his 1 tackle of the game, but he was actually in on the play that injured Ramondre Stevenson. He made an excellent play where he came off of the edge. He sort of hugged that line of scrimmage, just ran down the offensive line, and he ended up, dropping Ramondre Stevenson, and it ended up being a little bit of that hip drop tackle that the NFL outlawed this season. But I just thought the discipline and the way that he was able to crash off the edge was really impressive, and it showed an understanding of what it takes to be a run stopper, and that's backed up by the statistics as well with him, where he was 4th out of all edge rushers for defensive run stops according to Pro Football Focus last year. Somebody who has some pedigree behind him, was a 2nd-round pick in last year's draft. Could have a lot of room to grow, I think, as a pass rusher. 4.5 sacks is nothing to, laugh at by any means, but Tuipulotu is somebody that I think could continue to build on that aspect of his game and end up being a really high quality player in the NFL for years to come. Especially, again, considering the fact that, again, we'll see what happens with the pass rushing, but an edge rusher who isn't a liability in the run game is also a massive positive in my books. Now, I have some final names here that I feel like they already have broken out a little bit over last season, so we'll run through some quick ones here. Boye Mafe of the Seattle Seahawks, defensive end. He had 9 sacks last season, so this is, again, a little bit on the safer side of breakout candidates. You can argue he's already, done that, but I expect that he's going to take another step forward as well with Mike McDonald in charge of that defense in Seattle. Of course, the McDonald was the defensive coordinator for the Ravens and had a lot of success there. I believe in him as a coach, and I think that Boye Mafe is somebody with a lot of potential that is going to benefit from having, a new face in those meetings, somebody who has a defensive background and can look to unlock him a little bit more. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is another player that really came on, I would say, especially in the latter half of the season. Linebacker for the Cleveland Browns, started 13 games, really started getting more consistent playing time around week 10. From then on out, he played in at least 72% of the Browns' defensive snaps, 72 tackles, 72 solo tackles, 101 combined on the year in limited playing time. He's going to be the full-time starter for Cleveland next season, and I think he can be in the ballpark of 150 total tackles this upcoming season, be in that top 10, maybe even closer to top 5. The defense was unbelievable last year, and he's somebody that I would put stock into as to being able to emerge as one of the faces for the defense moving forward. Myles Garrett gets all the credit, but they have players on all three levels. Denzel Ward in the secondary. Maybe Owusu-Koramoah is somebody who can, put himself, I wouldn't say Myles Garrett tier because he's kind of in his own stratosphere there, but somebody that is, one of the leaders of that defense for years to come. And then Ifeatu Melifonwu, another player that became a full-time starter in week 14 for the Detroit Lions, plays safety for them, and his ability to come up the field and apply pressure as a pass rusher is what jumps off the screen to me and to others as well. But the fact that he also grades out well in coverage is something that, this is a Lions defense that was far from even competent just 2 years ago, but now they have a number of young pieces that they feel like they can build around. Hutchinson is obviously the headliner there. Some of the other first, second round selections, a Brian Branch, a Jack Campbell, some of these other players, Anzalone is in there as well, but Melifonwu is a really exciting player, and I think that, he is in for another big year ahead of him. But let me know what other players you guys think are going to step up and surprise a lot of people in the upcoming NFL season. Again, really looking forward to being able to cover some more NFL as the year goes on here. But we're now going to be taking our next break, and we're going to be switching gears to the MLB. The All-Star festivities kick off tonight with the Home Run Derby. So we're going to be looking through a combination of tonight's Derby and with the All-Star game tomorrow, just some of the lines, the betting lines, and some of the things that stand out to me around the event. So we will be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we are now going to be shifting gears, and we're going to be closing out the show with some thoughts on the MLB. It is officially the All-Star break. We had a number of things. We had the draft last night. We had the Rising Stars game take place yesterday afternoon. So already sort of into the thick of it. But in terms of pro-ready events as well, we have the Home Run Derby that is taking place tonight. So the participants there in order of betting odds: Pete Alonso is the favorite, followed up by Marcell Ozuna and Bobby Witt Jr., who are both tied for second. Gunnar Henderson, Adolis Garcia, Teoscar Hernandez, Jose Ramirez, and Alec Bohm. So we do have some changes to the format with the Home Run Derby this upcoming year. They did away with the bracket-style head-to-heads in the first couple rounds, which personally I am a huge fan of. Now, watching two of the MLB's best face off against one another is a lot of fun, absolutely. But I didn't love how, kind of the luck of the draw sometimes with the seeding where you could have, in theory at least, the second best score in the first round, and you could have been eliminated because you went up against the number one option. For all my fantasy football, or you can say fantasy baseball fans out there as well, I feel like, we've all sort of experienced those types of things where you finish second in the league in scoring, but you just got dealt a bad hand there. I just felt like there was a little bit too much luck that was tied into that. So I like that they're going back to just the 8 batters hitting. The top 4 performers go on to advance to the semifinals, and then of course from there, final 2 to the finals. But another change is that there now isn't an unlimited attempts in a given time period for each round. There is a maximum number of pitches that you can hit in the first two, in all the rounds here. It's a maximum of 40 pitches in the first 2 rounds, and then a max of 27 pitches in the finals. There, it's either you hit those or your clock runs out. In the first 2 rounds, it's 3-minute timers. The finals, it is 2 minutes. I'm curious to see whether or not it does have any impact on fatigue in terms of making things easier for players, knowing that it's not just rushing in as many swings as possible, that there is actually a cap at some point along the lines. And again, I'm just wondering if there is going to be any strategic changes from some of these, players in the event of trying to, pace themselves maybe a little bit more than the rush that we've seen in the past. But as for my predictions for this event, I would probably lean Gunnar Henderson. He was pretty due. He just hit a home run yesterday that I believe put them at 28. Put him at 28 home runs on the year. I do feel like a lot of the times this event can favor the younger players who have more stamina. Now, the fact that there are these rules in place as well that mean that they can't overexert themselves maybe in a first round, I think could actually go to the benefit of Gunnar Henderson. Throw Bobby Witt Jr. in that conversation as well. Again, this is all speculation. It might not end up having the rule changes, that is, might not end up having that big of an impact on the event. But I'm just trying to think out the different angles here of what impact the rules could have prior to, so we'll see about that. Bobby Witt Jr. is definitely in that conversation as well, as home run numbers aren't quite as high, but I believe he has the highest average exit velocity out of all of the participants, so Bobby Witt Jr. is probably a pretty good bet as well. He is sitting at plus 425 is what I last looked at on DraftKings for that. Gunnar Henderson is a little bit behind that. Gunnar is at, the odds since I last looked at this have changed, where Gunnar is actually moved up to tie with Ozuna and Bobby Witt Jr. So seems like there might be some action on Henderson for tonight's home run derby. But I do also have a couple other names that I think are definitely in play. You have to mention Pete Alonso, who is the favorite for this event at plus 320. He has 2 titles to his name already. He's looking to tie Ken Griffey Jr. for the most home run derby titles in MLB history. So that is definitely a big headline to tune into. I think that Adolis Garcia has some sneaky interesting value, sitting at plus 600. I know he's not having the ideal season for what his own expectations, and I'm sure Rangers fans were expecting coming into the year, but at the same time, he can still smack the long ball, and maybe he has a little bit of the hometown juice to him that could help him out. And then the last thing I'll say here, for whatever it's worth, is that Marcell Ozuna is probably, he's a really good candidate for this based off of how good of a player he is. But also the fact that he is probably the league's least favorable, him winning is the league's least favorable outcome. I could see that happening just out of almost the irony of it. Making the MLB pay a little bit maybe for even putting him in this event. But let me know who you are picking in the comment section. But the All-Star Game, looking at a couple things here, the American League, as I came into this at least, was favored. It does seem to be that way. Their odds actually improved. They were minus 120 when I first put notes, but during the show just about 40 minutes ago, they did announce that Corbin Burnes is going to be starting the game. Burnes, of course, the ace for the Baltimore Orioles, so he is going to be facing off against Paul Skeens in the National League. I think that, all things considered, a very solid, top two starters for each of these teams, and should be a really fun display there. When you're looking at MVP odds for this event, Aaron Judge is the favorite at plus 800. Some names behind him, of course, Shohei Ohtani in the conversation, Juan Soto, Gunnar Henderson, Bryce Harper, Marcell Ozuna, Bobby Witt Jr., Adley Rutschman. I feel like the All-Star Game can be a little bit of a crapshoot sometimes, so I definitely would not listen to myself in terms of betting advice on this event for the MVP, but I would probably lean with Shohei Ohtani if you think the National League is going to win. Clearly the best player there. He was in a little bit of a cold streak for a bit there, going back to the Phillies series and then headed into the weekend where the Dodgers faced off. I was against the Tigers, if I am not mistaken, but I think he was able to go yard as well, at least once during that series, and we'll see whether or not he is, again, it's the All-Star Game, so definitely a different intensity, but I feel like maybe he has lost some of that cold streak a little bit, and we will see there. But if you're going to pick somebody from the American League, I feel like this might be the All-Star Game of the future, kind of, because we have Paul Skeens, who has emerged as this, ace, a generational talent there, that he's obviously a headliner. You have names like Elly De La Cruz and Fernando Tatis. If you think the American League is going to win, I would probably lean with one of the Orioles, Gunnar Henderson or Adley Rutschman. I think either one of them are great candidates to win this. Again, I feel like it's, you're kind of just throwing a dart at a board when you're talking about All-Star Game MVP. You have no idea how long any of them are even going to play. But I could definitely see Rutschman, going yard in this event and earning some honors there, and maybe just the bias of what the overall game feels like, and having these young stars could sway in the direction of one of the Orioles. I was listing young stars, Bobby Witt Jr. You can put into that conversation as well, but Bobby Witt also isn't starting this game, so I'd probably lean Gunnar over him because of that fact. But again, let me know who you are thinking of going for here in terms of the All-Star Game MVP. But we are going to be taking our final break of the show now, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to quickly wrap up here by talking about my Boston Red Sox a little bit and their series win against the Kansas City Royals to extend their lead for that last wild card spot a little bit. So we are going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be just talking about the Red Sox, who wrapped up their first half of the regular season and did so vastly exceeding expectations, where at this point they are now in that third wild card spot headed into the All-Star break with a record of 53-42, so 11 games over. Let me double check that. Are they 11 games over or 10 games over? 53-42, 11 games over 500 for the first time all season, and quite the surprise if you ask just about any Red Sox fan coming into the year. And they were able to do so by winning 2 out of 3 games against the Kansas City Royals over the weekend. They end up dropping game 1 in this series, which really, as soon as it started and you got off to that ugly start in terms of the, it was right around the 4th inning probably. I mean, the Sox did actually have the lead early on in this game where they were up 4-1 after the 2nd inning, but ultimately it just didn't really feel like that was ever really going to be the game. It was Cooper Criswell making his first start in the majors in just about a month versus Cole Reagans, who is a very solid left-handed pitcher, and we just talked about on Friday how the Sox have tended to struggle against left-handed pitching this season. Criswell actually played pretty well, all things considered. 6 innings pitched, 8 hits, 2 walks, and 2 earned runs. Overall solid. Now, there were a total of 5 runs that were scored during his outing, thanks to some bad defense and the fact that he was allowing traffic. And that is just kind of a common theme with this Red Sox team, is that they have pitchers that sort of play to contact, and they haven't been the sharpest defensive team, especially now at this point. You feel a lot better about their outfield defensively, but the middle of that infield especially is not the cleanest. So, that's something that Criswell kind of out of his control, but also, again, he did allow a lot of traffic where it was, it was a good amount of traffic. It was 10 base runners in 6 innings pitched, which ultimately isn't terrible, but it's not the cleanest thing ever. But went 104 pitches, which was very surprising, very much needed for the bullpen to have a little bit less pressure on them. Reagans, on the other hand, was able to pretty easily, handle the, I was going to say, I said 4-1 earlier, but I was looking at the wrong game on my phone at that point. The Sox only scored 1 run in this game, so yeah. Reagans did very well for himself in this one. 7 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 walk, 7 strikeouts, and just 1 earned run. But the Sox are now 12-15 against starting left-handed pitchers this season. Another sign that they could definitely use a right-handed bat at the trade deadline this year. And also, another thing that sort of ties into the fact that this game just never felt like it was theirs was the fact that they have just been so bad on Fridays for some reason this year. A very weird trend there with them, but they are 4-12 on Fridays this year according to StatMuse, and they end up losing this game at 6-1. But games 2 and 3 were very encouraging notes to go off on headed into the All-Star break, where Cutter Crawford has just been incredibly efficient over the course of the past couple starts for him. And it's something that, we felt like Cutter Crawford, at least I felt like Cutter Crawford going into this season had, a level that he was going to potentially be able to tap into. And he started the season really strong, but as we know, Crawford already, exceedingly over his career high in innings pitched. And that's something that the Red Sox understand and are trying to manage as well as they can, of giving him the extra off days. And that's where, when you look in some of these starts where I think he's now running on 16 scoreless innings, and there are a couple starts like in the Yankees game where you feel like he has a lot more in him, but at that point you just don't want to physically tax him. We understand at this point, you already know Tanner Houck is running on a career high in innings pitched, and you're just trying to sort of make it through the season with the arms you have. Now, that being said, I've talked about before, I feel like the Red Sox could very easily, benefit from going out and getting an extra starting pitching arm in the upcoming trade deadline. You look at who they have right now, and the top three is overall pretty solid. It's Tanner Houck, who is in the conversation at least for AL Cy Young this year. Cutter Crawford as well, having at least this recent resurgence. Overall feels like a good arm, but not one that you feel extremely confident about. When by the time the playoffs come around, is his arm still going to be on him at that point? Is he still going to have the same stuff that he has recently been dealing? And then, Bayo or Pivetta as a third starter, which neither one of those options are bad, but neither of them are great necessarily either, and the Red Sox could just benefit from having some insurance as well. So, just wanted to quickly note on that. Anything else here? I mean, Dom Smith actually had a very good series, and it's funny the way that he has become a surprise contributor for this Red Sox team and a fan favorite, really. The first baseman that not the step first baseman, but the baseman that stepped up. That's a whole thing that went on with Red Sox fans and a situation with a sign at Fenway over the weekend, but last notes here would be Bayo's start. I mean, it kind of felt like ultimately this is what you can expect from Bayo. Now, the overall execution, I think that there should be a level higher, but, he allowed a lot of traffic, but only allowed 3 runs. He had just had a career high 11 strikeouts in the start prior. That's not something that he needs to consistently have in his arsenal. The expectations are a lot lower than that, especially right now, considering, where they were headed into the season because of the fact that he hasn't necessarily evolved to the guy that Red Sox fans were hoping for. But just be a reliable starter for them, be able to get your 6 innings and get out with minimal damage. Now, this is 3 straight outings where he has allowed a run in the first inning. A little bit concerning there, just doesn't make you feel great necessarily. It's almost like he's not ready. But, at the same time, expectations have just shifted on Brayan Bello, so that's kind of where we are at with that. Kenley ended up closing that game out with a 2-inning save. Still feels like, at this point, Kenley is just such an interesting kind of character and piece into this Red Sox puzzle over the past 2 years, where they haven't been all that competitive. And they were at least in ball games for a lot of last season, and right now they are 11 games over 500, so you can't say they're not competitive, but not seen as any type of a real World Series contender necessarily. And Kenley, outside of one really bad stretch during the 2023 season where it was, when he was going up against the Braves and he had just hit 400 career saves, that, it was a little bit of a rough patch there. And you still never feel like you get a clean Kenley Jansen inning, that there is usually some traffic that, crowds the base paths a little bit, and Kenley makes you sweat. This game was 2-inning save. We did see him actually strike out the side in the 8th inning, which, again, kind of unheard of with Kenley, it feels like. Ran into a little bit more trouble in the 9th inning, but got out of it. Don Rafaela, who continues to impress, made a really crucial save there to help him get out of that trouble. But Kenley's blown just one save all season, and again, I'm not saying it always looks the cleanest, but when you're comparing him to Clay Holmes, who is currently, the all-star closer for the American League, you got to feel pretty good about what Kenley has been able to give you if you're the Red Sox. And as you're going through his story of him in Boston, even during this offseason, he was, seeming like he was disinterested in sticking with the Red Sox long term, that he wanted to be with a team that was more invested in winning. He and Rafael Devers both have sort of spoken up about the front office, of them trying to go and make a move, and feels like there might be a little bit more momentum of them actually buying a little bit, which is something that I was not expecting. I still don't want to get my hopes up necessarily that they are going to make some moves at the deadline, but it's at least a conversation now. And Kenley, just overall to round out this thing, it's been pretty bumpy, and it hasn't exactly been the perfect fit for him in Boston, but he has gotten the job done time and time again. And the Red Sox are, if they're going to try and be competitive this year, having him is an important part of that equation. But again, Red Sox finish off the first half of the season with a 53-42 record in that third wild card spot. 1 game back of the Yankees, 4.5 games back of the Orioles. Any Red Sox fan would take that coming into the year. So we'll see how much they are able to, maintain that level of success, or if they're going to fizzle out like a lot of these other Red Sox teams that we've seen in the past couple years. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.